Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Our topic today is growing up with Rex Stanford. Rex Stanford was a well-known parapsychologist who died last year. My guest is Rex's identical twin brother, Ray Stanford. Ray has had a career as a psychic and trance channeler. He is the author of books such as Speak, Shining Stranger, The Spirit, Unto the Churches, and the Fatima Prophecy. He has also established a reputation as a UFO researcher and is the author of the book Socorro Saucer. In addition, he has established a career as a paleontologist. In fact, he's used his intuitive skills to make a long series of amazing discoveries, so much so that the Washington Post Sunday magazine did a cover story about him, calling him the amazing Dino Man. Now, if you haven't seen the previous interview with Ray titled The Blue Apple, I encourage you to view it. And in fact, I'm going to link to it right now in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. If you have the right equipment, you'll be able to link directly to it. I recommend that you watch that video. It'll make this one all the more meaningful. The interview with Ray took place at his home in Maryland, and I can tell you it's the only time I got on an airplane and flew halfway across the country just to conduct an interview, or a series, really, of interviews for New Thinking Aloud. I'm delighted that I did it, and now I'll switch over to the video we made on that occasion. Why don't we start talking about your very earliest memories of Rex?
It's hard to explain it. It's like your other half, you know. We were always there together. And so I'm not sure how separately we thought, although we were always, from the start, it was obvious to me that his personality and I were different in almost opposite polar ways. I don't recall ever much in the way of fights or fusses. I'm sure we must have had some somewhere along the way, but I guess you repress those kind of things more than the more positive phases of life. And it's hard to explain it at that age, but even then, there was that distinct personality difference in which I was interested in things and rocks and things I could analyze. That are physical things that I could analyze. And Rex was more, I guess, I don't know, an abstract thinker, but early on, I know he became very, very fascinated. Soon, well, of course, he had been influenced by the fact that my mother talked frequently about how, and she didn't use the word, but psychic her mother was, Cornelia, Neely, as people called her. We called her Big Mama, as her grandmother. And she's a really sweet lady. But she just had showed all of her life, and my mother just took it for granted. And Rex, I guess, took more of an interest in that even than I did. I knew that I had things happening that must be psychic, but as a kid, I didn't know a name for it. I just remember early on, the first name in science I ever hear Rex was J.B. Ryan, even when he was quite pretty young. I don't remember how young. So, and yet here I was instead interested in space travel, and I started building these rockets, of which you saw a couple of little rocket engine nozzles a while ago. I was just oriented towards space. He was oriented toward the inner space, and I say I was oriented toward the outer space, the things out there. And of course, in 1947, I just grabbed onto the reports that began with Kenneth Arnold, and but Rex never. I mean, he found them interesting. He didn't reject them. He was interested in them, but he never got absorbed and absolutely obsessed with it like I did. And while I, dared to go to the principal's wife in the school ground and say, when I grow up, I'm going to find out what these flying saucers are. I'm going to tell the whole world. Rex wasn't even on the scene. He didn't. I mean, he didn't reject my interest at all, but he just didn't seem as interested in these space things as always internal thought and psychology, and of course parapsychology.
But Rex did travel with you to Peru back in, it must have been, the early 60s or late 50s?
This was 57.
57.
January of 1957, right out of high school. We'd graduated from high school in 56.
Yeah, and it was because, if I recall correctly, Williamson?
Yes, George Hunt Williamson was doing voice channeling and claimed to be coming data. He didn't talk about, as my readings did when I got into that, the unconscious of Rex Stanford. Didn't talk about that. It always claimed to be external entities of some sort, some of which, of course, I think came out of Madame Blavatsky or Theosophy or something. I'm not sure. Anyway, for some reason, Rex and I both fell for it. Right out of high school. I guess you're looking for some kind of adventure to start with right when you get out of high school, and none of us had immediate plans to go to college. In the first place, we were in kind of tight financial straits because my father had been re-hospitalized because of tuberculosis, and so we didn't think. I don't even know how we got the money to go to Peru. That itself was a miracle of some sort. But Rex was there, believing the whole thing, but it's hard to explain. In fact, it's hard now for me to imagine that he would have been there, that he would not have separated enough intellectually that he wouldn't have accepted that kind of thing as I did.
We need to go back, I suppose, to the UFO sightings that you both experienced and in the presence of your friends.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Of course, we had this spectacular event, really, of September 18th, 1956, and it was out on the high desert of California, right in the within BB gun shot of Giant Rock, Van Tassel's Giant Rock. It was on a sunshiny day, September 1856, and I don't recall it. I don't think Van Tassel was around that day. I think he'd gone somewhere. But we were there with a friend, Michael J. Rosicki, Jr., and we all saw and experienced this rather remarkable thing. We felt that, and Rex was in on this. He fully accepted that we had gotten, or that I had gotten, at least a telepathic message that we could be contacted. We would encounter a UFO, alien craft, whatever you want to think of them as being, on the desert that day. And I felt kind of led in telling us where to go and so on and so forth. Rex went right along with this, and I'm glad he did, because then he got to witness and see for himself the reality of this. But even in that little first film, that 8mm film, as you saw, we could see through binoculars more than we could with that camera, but and we could see clearly a golden crescent shape looking thing, like it was crescent shape, but with a glowing field around it that was pulsing like a jellyfish in water. And so in this film, as you saw in one frame, you can make out the dipolar, let's say, donut-shaped visible part of the field that I know now was made visible by plasma interacting in the magnetic field of the craft. And we at the time even felt it was visible evidence of magnetic field. We didn't know the word plasma and so on and so forth. We saw it, and it was very exciting. We talked about how it looked like a jellyfish, its field did. I mean, you could see it that well, even, right with our eyes and then the binoculars. And fortunately, the camera recorded it. But I'm so glad that Rex went along, because then he remained in harmony and full acceptance of my bigger involvement with UFOs and instruments to record UFOs, while he's dealing with the inner man, the psychological. It was probably helpful to me that the other side of me was out there in the inner, and I think that he in a way was out into the outer by way of my involvement. So it was a symbiotic relationship, perhaps you can say. We were never at ends on that at all. And even when we withdrew from this crazy thing of Rick Williamson, as he was called, George Hunt Williamson, Rick Williamson, in this Priorio Todos de los Santos. He called it All Saints Priory. Well, I didn't knowingly meet any saints there, but it was in the boondocks east of the Rio Mayo, outside of a little town. They didn't even have electricity or water, and back in those days. Why they chose that location, I don't know, but it may have been a stupid choice. Except it was a good choice for me because I got to see along, I think, with Rex. And definitely at least one other person on the patio that day, as I've said, a spectacular black dome disc with red glowing, we now know, plasma swirling. If you're looking up at it this way, it's running clockwise.
Now, to be clear, that observation was in Peru, is that right?
That was in Peru, in Moyobamba, east of the Rio Mayo, in the state of San Martin. And at the time I said it was hardly even a town on the map. It was so small yet. They had an unpaved runway that DC-3s could take you into and out of. And that's how we got in, and that's how we eventually got out, was that way. But it was even an unpaved, I'm pretty certain that it was even just a dirt runway. Imagine a DC-3 in the desert going and going to some kooky community. But we were open to psi stuff. It's just we hadn't had enough experience to learn to discern what was real and what was part of the fantasy of the subconscious.
Let's go back now to the sighting at Giant Rock.
Okay.
You had some sort of an impression in advance of that sighting that if you go there, you will see something.
That's right, absolutely. Well, we really believed that.
How did it come to you?
It's hard to say. A knowing is all I can say. It's just a knowing, and you feel. My interpretation, at least at the time, was that it was directed, that it was coming from alien beings. I didn't feel I knew them personally, but I felt they were telling me, we will meet you. We'll give you a show out there, so to speak.
And if I understand correctly, you traveled from Texas to California.
Well, yes, of course, we had lived in Texas, but we went out to California. And for that time, we were living in Los Angeles. We got a little apartment there, and I don't remember anything about how we even financed that, since we didn't have jobs. We were just out of high school. Well, were we out of high school? Let's see, September 1856. Okay, I guess that's the September right after we graduated in May, suppose, from W.B. Ray High School in Corpus Christi.
And were there any sightings prior to the one in Giant Rock?
I think there were, but of course that one stands out so much. We got a film and the nice visible magnetic field that keeps that high in your memory, and also it's like I don't remember what we may have seen before. I'm sure there were some things, but maybe they were at night. But it's a broad daylight, and we're getting a film of it, and there are three of us there seeing it. We know we're not hallucinating, and the camera didn't hallucinate, and it was, let's say, it was in a way, in a sense, to really getting us into ufology. It was there. It was the break in our virginity of any skepticism whatsoever. When we saw that, I wasn't skeptical. We were responding to this, and Rex accepted that Ray is getting these messages. In fact, he too felt that he could feel these messages too, but he just didn't seem to feel them as graphically as I did.
But from a parapsychological point of view, receiving the message, traveling hundreds of miles, and then going to the location where you saw the UFO is pretty clearly a psi event.
Well, I'm not sure that it was that message that brought us to California. It may have been George Adamski, not as a personal effort, but because we believed George Adamski at that stage. We even have stupidly in our little book, look up, this first book that we came on UFO, we even have a drawing of a so-called Venusian spacecraft, which was nothing but a small man-made object, about so big apparently. And but that drove us out there. But while we were out there, I think was when I received this strong impression. And interesting enough, I did not conceptualize it or feel it in the context of what Adamski had described in flying saucers that landed, or later inside the spaceships. It was more that it was alien beings, but it wasn't in a sense like, hey, we're Adamski's buddies, we'll meet you. It wasn't that. It felt somehow independent. I can't explain it, or I don't know if I'd even said it that way at that time, but it just felt like it was alien beings that somehow I had an inner kinship with. Like they knew me to some extent, and that I knew them. That's hard to explain. I wouldn't take it any further than that, because I don't know if there is any further than that. But I do believe that whoever these occupants are, that they are better at reading our minds than we are at reading theirs.
So let me try to be as clear as I can, that before you even saw the UFO at Giant Rock, before you even felt you had an intuition to go there for the purpose of seeing a UFO, you were already interested in the writings of George Adamski.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
You and Rex both.
Yes. I'd have to check the dates, but there was also a man named Truman Bethram that I can't recall that I ever decided that he was a hoax. I wouldn't say today to say that he was genuine, but I'd need to reread the book and think it over and see about my feelings about it today. But I know that Rex had read Adamski stuff, but I don't know if he ever read Truman Bethram or some of the other materials. People, of course, there was George Van Tassel, as we said, but so far as I know, I don't recall. It seemed to have been more of a psychic thing, and I don't recall. He never claimed to have taken any photographs at all, and Bethram never claimed to have taken any photographs. But at the time, I definitely believed in Truman Bethram, and I think Rex probably kind of accepted it, but never ate it with a spoon like I did. Uh-huh. You know, I mean, the idea that a real spaceship could come down and something might be thinking about you and respond to your thoughts and do something, or maybe even come out and communicate with you. Yes, Rex accepted that, but it wasn't as dear to his heart as mine was. He was, and like I said, we were kind of opposites, and I was the more experiential, and he was more interior, I guess you could say. And yet it was I who interiorly felt these messages more deeply, I think, than Rex did. But he did definitely acknowledge. He said, "Oh yes, Ray, I can feel it. We've got to go out. They're going to be out there." I remember him saying that.
Now, at this point in time, I think it's fair to say both you and Rex would agree that Adamski was, if not 100%, was largely a fraud.
I would say 110% fraud. Oh, I mean, that sounds funny, but absolutely every photograph he ever claimed to have taken, as far as I know, was fake. And I think I have pretty good evidence and things I saw even in his own studio.
So what I find intriguing here is the possibility that this fraud wrote these books with such literary capacity that it stimulated your young minds to have what appears to have been an authentic precognitive experience.
I wouldn't attribute that to Adamski because of my intense interest in the field from 1947 on.
As a 9-year-old.
It's just that Adamski was the first one to come up with alleged photographs and say, I actually met him. That's what grabbed me, even though I later, of course, have completely rejected it. It was that idea that you could get that close, that intimately involved with aliens, that grabbed me, because I knew, as I said, even well before I ever went to California, I mean, I was building those rockets, and some of them are pretty good size. And I mean, I was so much into space travel and wanting to be involved. I was going to become a rocket engineer, but then once I had enough experiences, and Rex went right along. I mean, he understood that once he had seen these things, I mean, when you see something like that and you actually see this field moving like a jellyfish around this thing, I'm sure it affected Rex as much as I did, but it just turned me on like you plugged me in. But I know for sure that was one that Rex was there and with me from the time before we left Los Angeles. He already was filled with it and felt indeed that if we went out there, and we had the confidence to invite our friend Michael Ropsicki, who was there and saw it all. So I'm glad to say that, in other words, Rex and I never parted ways on this thing of the UFOs. He always accepted my UFO work, and because the things he had seen, and even after he was out of the scene and off into college, and I'm encountering these things, and then me filming these things with good witnesses, he was thrilled with this. This was just fine, but it never distracted him from his parapsychological, which was very important, because I think he made, in his psi-mediated instrumental response, or PMIR as we always call it, I think he made a major contribution that people still need to think a lot more about what he said and was finding about how this works from inside of us. I've experienced PMIR for years, and it's just as natural as breathing, almost. And I think and Rex experienced PMR too at times, but not as knowingly as I did. Always, my unconscious seemed to be closer to the surface, although Rex had his conscious into that in analyzing that. I had that helping me analyze these external things. Sometimes you can get, I think, too intuitive in trying to do your scientific research. I think we need to keep a good balance. And I think my relationship with Rex helped me keep that balance. I think we kept each other in balance. It kept him open to some things that otherwise, in his distraction to the interior, he might forget that something incredible is happening out there. So we were a good balance all the way along.
I think you've described Rex as being more introverted and you were more extroverted.
That's right. Even
as children.
That's an accurate description, very much so. I was doing a lot more, dating girls and so on and so on. Rex was more interior. I don't recall, he may have dated a few times, but I don't recall him ever getting involved with anybody until he met the girl from Sweden who had read our book over there, and Birgit Olsen was her name. Her maiden name was Olsen, and she came over and married him. And I just wasn't compatible with her. She wasn't my cup of tea, but she was Rex's cup of tea. And the friends who know Rex quite well, like one in New York I'm thinking about, really feel that she was a tremendous boon to him. But our personalities were so different. I had more experience with women, but it's weird to say he was like my other half, and I think he regarded me as his other half. In a sense, it's a strange thing to have another half. But after all, we split from. According to the doctor, my mother had gotten high blood pressure, and we had to be delivered quite a bit prematurely, but. He indicated, I guess, whatever it means, we came from the same placenta or whatever. He was sure we were identical twins, and I am too, because of our mental relationship.
Well, there's been quite a bit of work published about telepathy between identical twins.
Yes.
That one twin would always know if anything happened to the other twin.
Yes, well, I think we had a lot of that going on too. I think he at times even knew things going on with me, but not as knowingly as I would feel with him. I was more conscious with telepathy, but he was definitely into it, and there was definitely a lot of telepathic interplay between us. Even when he's off in college and I'm wherever I was.
Now, at some point after you had rejected the UFO contactee movement that you and Rex were both intrigued by, you set up the Association for the Understanding of Man, And Rex had some involvement there. I know you published a journal, and one of the covers shows a picture of Rex standing alongside some looked like EEG recording instrumentation.
Yes, well, yes. He was not a part of the Associated Management in the sense that it was formed around and centered upon my psychic work, my so-called readings and so on, and but because he was into Psi and scientifically, and we wanted to try to take a scientific attitude, even though we were promoting and publishing things that came out of my unconscious, and I think there was a lot of good stuff, and my wife today will swear that there was, but there was, I think there was subjectivity too, and belief in some of these things for a while, and then gradually I realized that so much of this that we might think was the work of external was not, and yet when things happen like the Blue Apple story, which I've told to you, I mean, there certainly appeared to be an independent existence there, but it didn't give Carlos Merida a name when it came into his studio and told him how to change the study for a painting and call it the Blue Apple. But anyway, the thing was, in the association, we deeply appreciated the parapsychological and wanted to show the scientific side of it and so on, as well as our maybe more subjective side. Let's say our side was impressionistic and his was more realistic art, so to speak, when we're dealing with this. But we were always harmoniously cooperative. So I don't think he was ever on the board. He was certainly never on the employ of the Association for the Understanding of Men. But there was a strong respect, and I think he respected my work, even though I feel confident that at least by into the 70s that he was probably more skeptical than I was at that time of the idea that any independent beings could speak through me. I think he understood it more as my unconscious.
At one point, isn't it the case that maybe before Rex had a university position that he was actually working out of one of your offices?
Yeah, I think maybe he did for a while.
Uh-huh.
Yes, and we financed him, but he was doing parapsychological research. He was never intimately involved with anything about the readings or the alleged beings that at times were supposedly speaking to me, as well as my unconscious. He didn't reject it.
Let me ask another question. To go back to the book you and Rex co-authored, look up, there were multiple UFO sightings reported in that book, not just the sighting at Giant Rock.
Oh, yes, indeed. Of course, reported there was even the one on Padre Island, which it turns out I was shocked to see at the list of witnesses that we had out there. We had quite a few group from Brownsville that were out there with us too. And we were, that wasn't the kind of thing, if I remember correctly, that any of us felt we had a telepathic message, but we wanted to go out on South Padre Island, which would be very dark, no artificial lighting at that time on the South Padre Island, at least where we went. And the far south end, yes, there I'm sure there was. But we went out to try to look for things, and whether we tried to send a telepathy, I don't even recall that. We were I could be wrong, but there were quite a few of us, and we were watching the skies. We got in a little, we did something we probably shouldn't have, but some fishermen just came in and decided to do some surf fishing there that night, just north of us. They pulled up. Well, we feel there's too many people out there. We didn't know if they had guns or not. Most fishermen don't carry guns. They carry a rod and reel. But we felt that it might discourage UFOs from coming around, or at least if they wanted to have any interaction with us, it might discourage that. So we went up to them, and what we said is, I said, or John said, John McCoy, we're out here conducting some experiments, and there's some aspect of it that might be dangerous. well, of course, if an alien spaceship coming down, that might be dangerous. And so we weren't too far from the truth, but maybe far from it another way. But we wanted to scare them out of there. So we said, look, it'd be better if you'd move at a safe distance, because it just might, or it might in some way affect our experiments, but it might be dangerous. So they left. But where they went, they headed to South Padre Island and called the police. They decided we might be doing something quite
illegal
and dangerous out there.
Yeah.
And so not too long after that, here came a state patrol car up with state patrolman Don Hoyt, I believe is his name, and there was a deputy sheriff, Steve Woods, and was there one other? I don't remember. I've forgotten. The affidavit is in the book, signed affidavit. What we did, and anyway, by the time they arrived, they pulled up, and here's this object hovering up there over the Gulf of Mexico. And we said, what are you boys doing out here this time of night? We had no rod and reel with us, so they knew we weren't fishermen. And I said, well, we came out to see if we could see and maybe even make contact with flying saucers. And in fact, we have one that look out the window, look up out there. And the officer got out of the car, and the deputy sheriff, whatever he was, got out of the car, and they said, what is that? And I said, I told you, that is, we believe, an alien spaceship. It's certainly not ours. And he began to, you'd have to read the book and see what happened. I don't remember all the details of what happened, but they finally began to get nervous and said, we have to get out of here. They decided to get out. And at that point, I think I may have said, would you be willing possibly to sign an affidavit to what you've seen? And they said, well, we'll think about it. We'll consider. I think maybe one of them said they would. But eventually, so we came back into town later after the event. There were 3 officers that showed up in response to the call from the fishermen, the concerned fishermen. And driving the car was Texas State Highway Patrolman Don Hoyt and his son Ray Hoyt. And so it was Don Hoyt and Ray Hoyt. Don was the state highway patrolman, and Ray Hoyt was the deputy sheriff. And then there with them in the car was Steve Woods. I think he was an undersheriff or something like that. I forget what he was called, but he was there. And so finally, when we got together and called them, when we went back to Brownsville some days later, it was very nice of them. Now, Don Hoyt, the state representative, said he didn't want to sign an affidavit, that he didn't consider that was official business that night, but he didn't feel it was good for him to sign an affidavit, but he'd be happy to pose in a photograph with his son or father, whichever it was, Ray Hoyt, who was a deputy sheriff, who was willing to sign an affidavit. And so Ray Hoyt, the deputy sheriff, and Steve Woods, the undersheriff or whatever he was, also signed an affidavit. But the policeman in uniform let us photograph him, as we showed in the book. So they were very cooperative. I understood his position. It might be back in those days. After all, Texas is bad enough today. I'm kind of ashamed to admit I'm from there, the way some things are going down there. But actually, it was really. I think it was very considerate of him to agree to pose in the photograph, and for them to do the affidavits. I mean, these affidavits go into some detail about what happened, and so on and so forth, and they're all notarized and have the official seal, the notary public that did this. So it was quite a coup for ufology. This was kind of a first, and we considered it a contact. It certainly wasn't a physical contact, but that we kind of felt like we had possibly attracted them out there. I'm not sure that we had. Maybe it was a coincidence, but it was a weird coincidence if that's the case. And little did I dream that it would someday come on the front, full color illustration on the front of a magazine called Fate magazine, which was a good sized magazine. I mean, it had quite a circulation. and the newsstands and to subscribers. And to this day, I have a big enlargement of the whole cover of the magazine up there that I saw shockingly about 25 years ago or 30 years ago. I saw it advertised and bought it right away because I was shocked that here was a poster being sold all these years later of this experience we had on Padre Island way back in the 50s. So that was what happened, and it may have been a psi-mediated instrumental response of some sort, maybe on the part of if you consider this was an alien craft and they came in response. I don't know why else they would show up out there. I mean, it certainly wasn't anything else interesting out there going on that island that night in the middle of the night of a dark November night.
Well, to jump around a little, you and Ray, while in high school, both competed in a science competition for the state of Texas.
Right.
He, I gather, presented something about parapsychology.
I think he did. I don't know. I don't recall what paper he presented, but that was there were several divisions of the state, and of course I was in the physical science because I was into rockets. And my paper was called "Experiments with the Multiple Stage Principles of Rocketry." Rex was, of course, in another side entirely, like we're opposite sides of the brain, so to speak. He was in, I guess, the psychological sciences side. And I suspect he did, I don't know what else he would have spoken unless it was a parapsychology. I'm pretty sure it was. And I'm not putting him down, but he didn't win a prize for his, but that's not to be unexpected because, I mean, after all, he was a pioneer and showing up in a high school in Texas talking about parapsychology. I mean, it's commendable that he was just daring to be there and give a talk on that subject. It showed that he had the conviction of his research. Mm-hmm. So it's great to his credit, even though they weren't in a position to cognitively appreciate, I don't think, the depth of Rex's approach to this, which was very good. But in my field, I got the top award in the physical sciences over all the high schools in the state of Texas. The ones that, I mean, the high schools that involve competition in the Texas, it's called the Texas Junior Academy of Science because it was, after all, high school. It wasn't professional science. But anyway, I got the first place, and you've seen the little gold Texas symbol that they gave me a pin to pin on. But I was very, very proud of that. That meant a lot to me. I'd put a lot of effort into my rockets, and I still don't know how I ever raised the money to build those rockets. It's weird. I've had a tendency to raise money for projects over the years, but I don't know that maybe I'm a good fundraiser at some level, but I can't even remember how.
Maybe it was psi-mediated instrumental
right.
responses.
It probably was.
You met the right people at the right time.
I wouldn't be surprised at all. It was quite, of course, my side of it was a totally different experience than Rex. I mean, we're out there launching these rockets, which were so big. I mean, they could. We had to get clearance through the U.S. Navy to make sure there would be no planes flying through those areas at that time, and clearance with the state police, make sure that they knew that we're going to be out there, and so on, and launching these things, totally different from the kind of interior things that Rex is doing. In fact, I don't think Rex ever went out to the island with us. I don't think it was fear. I just don't think he was that interested in the rockets. Mm-hmm. He was in the interior kind of thing, and I think he did a remarkably. I mean, still to this day, I think his PMIR, psi-mediated instrumental response hypothesis, was one of the most positive things that I've ever seen done in parapsychology, because I had felt it working for years, but we consciously, I mean, at least people in my family, I think a lot of us and a lot of people are responding to unconscious psi in stopping where we stop, and or doing what we do, or showing the right place to see that UFO, or to find that dinosaur track. And I credit Rex with his work to also giving me the courage to realize and think about intellectually what was happening when I was getting these interior urges. And I think it's really to his credit. I'm proud that.
Well, it's interesting that your paths really diverged when it came to going to college. He went and pursued a doctoral degree, and you really had a little college. I don't
Right.
know if
No, I never got a degree.
you never got a degree at
We have
all.
no letters behind my name whatsoever. Although I have, several species of dinosaur tracks and a new species of dinosaur in the Smithsonian, and this major discovery described as world class at the Goddard Space Flight Center. The thing people need to understand: you can do science without having 3 initials behind your name, and I'm proud to say I'm the living proof of it. And these are not. These are scientific papers in major scientific journals that presented these things. It takes quite a bit. To describe a new species of dinosaur based on what you find of the natural casts and molds of the skeleton. This is the first dinosaur that had been officially recognized that it was based not on the bones, but the natural casts and molds of the bones. We live in a high acid environment around here, this coastal area, and it disintegrated the bones, but they infilled, and they got the natural cast, and I found this and pointed out the areas and described them in the scientific paper and showed that it was, in fact, the only hatchling nodosaur that, so far as I know, has ever been found in the entire world, and certainly the only hatchling dinosaur of any kind ever found in the eastern United States.
And this paper, if I recall, was published in Nature.
No, this particular paper on the dinosaur was published in the Journal of Paleontology.
Okay.
And the one that was published in Nature's Scientific Research is the one about the big Goddard find, which is a slab 8.5 feet long with incredible number of animal types having left their footprints, calling card, there.
Well, I'm sure there are many paleontologists and other scientists who would love to have been published in Nature and never have been.
For 10 years, they had an actual big, beautiful display with it, explaining it, and a thing with my picture and other things beside it.
Well, at some point, I'm imagining watching your identical twin brother go get a doctoral degree. It might have occurred to you to do the same.
Well, not in paleontology, it didn't at all. If it would have been in it, it would have been in engineering and physics and aimed toward plasma physics and things of that nature. But I got so involved. Well, in the first place, I got so much in my psychic work in the 70s, and then when we began to get the good cameras, magnetometer, gravimeter, spectrographic camera, and so on, and we do have spectra also that we got of UFOs. But this, as I begin to get this, you get so many of these events, and maybe a lot of them will occur of PMR. In fact, maybe it might not have been there if it hadn't been for PMR. But when you get this, you begin to realize that you're finding things, you're contributing to knowledge, and that you don't need a PhD. Not only that, but I began to work when I began to find these tracks with Dr. Martin Lockley, the University of Colorado, one of the top track people in the world, and he was just thrilled with what, of course.
But your first passion was ufology, I gather. You did the
That's right.
Book on Socorro. That was 1964.
And the sighting was in 64, yeah.
And you were on the site. You were one of the very first researchers.
Yes, that's right. Yeah,
on the site.
Just a few days after, as soon as I could get there from Phoenix. Yeah. And Jim and Carl Lorenzen beat me there. They were there a day or two before. But I've showed you pictures of what I think is evidence. You haven't yet had a chance to look at the rocks, but what I think may be melt. But they fortunately took the brunt of it in the sense that Carl found a section of soil that apparently was vitrified, turned to glass, fused together, at least roughly on the top. And she took it home to Tucson, where their headquarters, where they lived, and where their Aerial Phenomena Research Organization was. And the government came in and told them, "You can't have this. You have to give this to us." And she got scared out. I guess she was a tough lady. I mean, she was a timid lady, and I'm sure she told them off, but they took it. They got it.
Well, is it fair to mention that to this very day you have artifacts that you've collected at that site?
Oh, yes. Yes, sure. I mean, I have. The thing is, I haven't found what laboratory to look, for example, these burned papers that have some interesting patterns in them that you've seen. But I'm more interested in the rocks that I have, and I'm experienced at looking at rocks. Some people say I have them in my head too, but I hard-headedly look at rocks with great scrutiny, and I've seen all kinds of rocks. It's not just tracks. I mean, I've been fascinated by rocks and minerals ever since I picked up the rocks before 9 years age of the railroad track, and used to ask my mother, Mama, how did this rock form? It's so strange. Only one she could identify was petrified wood, of course. She didn't have a background. But I'm used to looking at rocks, and these things that I've found, now it's strange. I get certain people, I'm not going to name the name of certain people, come and contact me, and I show them all of this stuff and let them have pictures and so and so and tell them about this. But not a one of them has made an effort to get a laboratory, a credible laboratory, that admits, they would be willing to admit, if it turns out to be exotic evidence of propulsion. What I'm looking for here, in both the burned papers and in the rock, is the question: is there evidence of extraterrestrial technology, or of this engine, this odd landing and takeoff engine that blew Zamora's mind, because he'd been out at Whitesand and watched rockets, and he knew that the rocket exhaust bounces off the ground or whatever it hits. But he saw this thing turn on with a kind of roar of a rocket, but it went right into the ground. Mm-hmm. And one of these rocks that I showed you, it looks like it has an interesting superficial glaze that pastes on it of green. This thing was right under where the thing played, except it was about 3 inches under. But remember that he saw the beam go right into the ground. This was not gas. This was not a rocket exhaust as we know it. This had to be, pardon the physics, but subatomic particles accelerated to relativistic velocities. That means accelerated to near the speed of light and penetrating the ground as subatomic particles. Gross matter, whole atoms, molecules of exhaust would have bounced right off in Zamora's face. But I mean, that's the thing. That's the one thing I heard, aside from just describing seeing these beings, is his amazement that why didn't it bounce off the ground at him or in a way? It just went in. That bothered Zamora. He realized that was the evidence of some really exotic propulsion, and it may well be, if it's true, that officer, was it Sam Chavez? Anyway, one of the police officers there, his photographs taken immediately after, within the hour of the takeoff, were reportedly fogged, and the government told him this had to be covered up, that this could not be told. And I have some documentation that shows that happened, and it did happen. Now, whether it was actually caused by this radiation, I don't know, but that is radiation. When you have subatomic particles traveling at relativistic velocities, penetrating right in the ground, it is a type of radiation, but it's also going to create probably secondary radiation as well, even if it was secondary radiation that fogged that film. But I'm proud to have these things. I just wish. Now, I've been so busy with my paleontological things, and as you know, the press coverage has been incredible on this, and wonderful and nice. But I want to find a lab that, it could be a lab that studies meteorites with instruments, but that is willing to say, wait, we have found that this evidence that Ray has, that this rock was melted, if it shows that kind of evidence, and there may even be some odd isotopes formed by this center of reaction. We don't know, but we need to look. But I've got to find labs, and that means human beings running labs that are willing to do this. It shouldn't be as nearly dangerous to your career as it would have been years ago.
Well, the fact that you haven't yet, 58 years later, found a lab that you could trust to analyze this material, explains why you couldn't have possibly gone to a graduate school or even an undergraduate school anywhere to study ufology.
No, you can't, because nobody knew anything. They hadn't studied enough. You couldn't get a ballot. You might get a course in how we need to approach the study, but you sure wouldn't get a course in evidence based on it, because the evidence that has been made available, the government has evidence, but as far as John Q. Public, no, there's absolutely there's very little. The work that I have done with what I have done with the films and the electronic recordings of magnetometer and gravimeter are beyond anything else that anybody in the public, I don't care how much money they had, has been able to do. But it's nothing compared to what the government has and knows. And yet they were desperate to take, for example, the space material that fell in San Antonio that we've talked about. Yeah. That was not a meteorite, but was of technological origin. I've told you how desperately break-ins into the poor guy's house after he wouldn't give it to the government, and the other things that happened. But there's when you get to these labs, a lot of them, probably their financing, if they go to analyze meteorites, may be paid for by the government.
Well, in fact, as I recall, Ray, you did collect samples that you did turn over to NICAP, the organization.
Oh, yes, the medal.
You were affiliated with, and never got returned to you.
I believe that is correct.
The point I do think is important to emphasize, since we're talking about your deceased twin brother, is that while he's getting his doctoral degree and then later became a professor and an emeritus professor in psychology at St. John's University, throughout all of that, he always respected the scientific work you were doing in the UFO field.
Oh yes, he was very thrilled every time I get occasion to say, "Look, Rex, I've got something I've never gotten before," and as you know, I've gotten some pretty remarkable and detailed things, and he accepted it all. He, to his credit, didn't let it sidetrack him out of his parapsychological research, because he knew he was well anchored there and was contributing a lot, even as I was in my field. So we respected our fields, and he rejoiced in my finds a lot. I mean, he really appreciated the fact that what I was finding. It's just that he couldn't let himself get too distracted where he got sucked into doing this instead of what he's doing. That's to his credit. After all, I regard it as identical twins. I mean, we were like opposite sides of the brain. One side does his job, one side does the other job. And I think there was a symbiotic, helpful inner relationship between us that I think we helped each other in some respects in the positions we took and what we were doing, so different and yet related.
Well, it's interesting because in a way you were more into the hard sciences than he was, but you were also more into the esoteric and intuitive fields than he was.
That's right. It's really kind of hard to understand. And of course, speaking from Rex's standpoint, I mean, as he would, if he were living today, I mean, he would reject the idea. I think that individual entities' names were given, and some of these were supposedly speaking through me in this unconscious state. He and I would concur that these names were probably derived out of things we had read or something in metaphysical literature or in theosophy or somewhere, and yet we saw, I mean, there are people whose lives were saved by medical readings from me. And I was looking at my apologies the other day to someone who wrote me thanking me after all these years again for the fact that his mother's life was saved by reading. And there was also a lot of other remarkable things that were uncovered and proven to be objective and real. And yet, when we look at those names and individuals, Kuhumi and
Hilarion,
and some of these other names, I mean, these I think were fictions of my unconscious. I'm pretty sure that they were. But I'm not ashamed that there was still some good guidance, some insight given in these discourses, even though maybe my unconscious realized it would get the attention of the people, and they'd pay more attention if somebody of authority, like some great spiritual name,
But at one point, it's fair to say you had a very large following for this type of channeling.
Yes, that is correct. And there's still a lot of people that say they're really inspired. I mean, there are all these readings that I don't even, these books, I mean, that are based on the readings. If Sheila were in here, she could tell you the name of the books and she could tell you some of the things. But it just, and I think if there are people that are inspired by this and it helps them live better lives and be more attuned with the universe, that is great. That is fine. But I would advise them, forget the trappings of the names and so ask yourself if the information works for you in a positive way.
So what I'm hearing is that Rex's hard-nosed approach to parapsychology influenced you to step back and reevaluate your work as a channeler.
Oh, sure, yeah. His objectivity taught me a lot about being not only just stepping back, but being objective and trying to analyze and not accept everything at face value. Now, I never accepted everything at face value. I still had a side of Rex in me, but I do think that his conversations with him and so on and so forth were very helpful to me and eventually causing me to pull out of this more subjective side of using my unconscious. And, of course, I still feel I'm using my unconscious and conscious in finding dinosaur tracks and being at the right time in the right place, not as a telepathic message, but just intuitively, PMIR, if you will, being there with the camera at the right place, the right time. And anybody who sees my collection and the number of films I've gotten, and with people, most of them have a lot of witnesses, and good witnesses, intelligent, objective witnesses. I really think that my approach to it was helped by my inner relationship with Rex and the objectivity at which he had to approach the subject because of the extremely controversial nature of parapsychology, particularly in the early days when he was, a pioneer in that. And I considered he was a pioneer. Ryan was the pioneer. But Rex, certainly with the PMI idea, I mean, he put things into words in that respect that nobody had really put, at least in that clear words and shown how it may operate in a real life.
Now, at one point, you gave up doing your readings and channelings. Was Rex an influence in that decision?
I don't think so. Well, I mean, he might have said, Ray, I think that'd be a good idea. But I don't think I ever asked him, should I? I mean, he might have said, he might have said something, but I don't think he ever tried to push me or overly encourage me one way or another. He would drop hints and say things, but we didn't. And even had he done so, I don't think we would have had a controversial relationship in it. If Rex is against my readings and so on and so forth at all, I would take it. Well, this is the other side of my brain talking at me.
Well, I'm gather that you and Rex had a close, personal, loving relationship as identical twins throughout your lives together.
Well, indeed we did. And that's the thing. It's really been tough on me when Rex died, in my opinion, of medical malpractice in the hospital after he had broken his leg. For example, every time over the years, for decades, I would find something interesting, think something interesting, discover something interesting. I would pick up the phone and call Rex. And today, I cry as I think about it. If something happens that is wonderful and I want to share it, I think, oh my God, I've got to call Rex. And then I realize there's no Rex to call. And that really gets to me. I've no longer got that other side of my head to talk to, so to speak. I mean, I consider us in a way one. And so, I don't know spiritually where Rex is or how he identifies himself. I believe there's spiritual survival. I, in fact, believe in reincarnation. But, I don't have no way. I don't claim to have any intellectual contact with him since his passing on. But it really bothers me to not have my twin brother to call and say, Rex, listen to this, listen to what I'm doing, listen to what's happening. Let me tell you about the UFO experience we had the night, the amazing film we got. And it's just not there. Telling somebody else is not like telling your twin brother.
Maybe a good note to close on. You explained to me earlier that your names, Rex and Ray, actually both mean the same.
Yeah, that's interesting. You see, my brother Rex was named after my father Rex. And so they wanted a name that sounded good with Rex, and they chose Ray. But I'm confident that neither my mother or my father knew that Ray is simply the Latinized form of king, and Rex is the Greek king. And because, I mean, bless their hearts, they were wonderful people. And my mother had read a lot and was remarkably like considering the fact that both of them only had school to the 8th grade. That's as far as their school went. Back in those days, a little town where they were was the 8th grade. So both of them only had an 8th grade education. And that makes it even more interesting that Rex and I have done the things we've done in science. But they had a good spirit relationship of their attitudes and talking to us about even controversial things. I mean, there was no, you're going to hell if you believe this or you resist that. It wasn't that. I think they had a very sophisticated genes. I don't know. I wonder where my father got his middle name Arlington, and weird to be named after a cemetery. I don't think he was. I don't know where they got that name for him, but anyway, to me it's amazing, and yet I attribute to my parents their good attitude that helped us get and achieve the things that we have achieved.
And it dawned on me, since you talked about you didn't know where the money came as a teenager when you built those rockets, right, or when you traveled to Peru, I have to imagine that your parents went through some personal sacrifices to see that you got that money.
The tradesmen, I don't think that my parents were able financially to give a cent to that. They were too poor. When I went to Peru, my father may have still been, he had been in the 1940s, he was a barber. And apparently in barbering somebody that had tuberculosis, I guess when somebody coughed or something, he got tuberculosis. And so before I was 9 years old, he was committed to the tuberculosis sanitarium in San Angelo, Texas. And he went through surgery. They had to put, I forget what it's called, do something to his lungs. And pitifully, they forgot and left a sponge in his thorax after the surgery, and years later it cropped up in 1954, I think, and it also caused somehow tuberculosis flared up, and so he had to quit his job that he had and being again in the tuberculosis, and we were so poor. My mother took a job just working at basically a laundry, or a place where they repaired clothing that they rented out, and so on and so forth. And you can imagine how little they got paid. I think my two older brothers at that time may have helped them some, certainly to the extent that they could. But so I know the money didn't come from them. Encouragement certainly could have come from them, but I can't. Of course, I had a job in my teens, different jobs at different times. One time I worked for Common Products Refining Company, where my older brother, who had a long time had a job there, helped me get a job there. So I had some money, but I'm not sure that if I got help, who I got it from, and especially the money to go to Peru. I mean, I know to come home, my grandmother, bless her heart, rescued us from Peru. But anyway, I know I had some wonderful parents and wonderful grandmother and relatives, and that helps. It shows that a PhD behind your name isn't everything in a parent or in a child. If they have faith in their ability to do something, and my mother's attitude definitely gave us faith in our own ability to think and to analyze and to try to do something meaningful in life, no matter how poor they were financially. They were rich in spirit. And that meant a tremendous amount to me. They were so wonderful. Imagine the hardship of all the tuberculosis and the financial hardships, and there yet they kept up such a positive attitude with us and helping us, and even encouraged when Rex got to college to encourage him that they didn't have the money. But I remember, I don't know if Rex had a job. I don't remember how he financed his way through. Maybe got a scholarship. Because I just don't remember. If Rex were here, he could probably answer that better than I do.
Well, I do know you showed me that in his freshman year in college, he received some awards, and I recall in the description of the award he got, it mentioned that he and his twin brother were doing UFO research.
Really?
Yes.
Well, that's interesting. That's nice that he dared mention that.
You showed me the newspaper article.
Oh, yes. Okay, we saw that. Yeah.
Well, Ray, this has been a very heartfelt conversation about somebody who is as close to you as your own DNA.
Right. Yeah. That's right. Yeah, right. I mean, I think a part of me at the physical plane is missing. I mean, Rex and I were, as far as I'm concerned, in some ways, two halves of one thing. Yeah. And if there is an awareness of my life from the spiritual plane, I'm sure he's watching, and at times I kind of feel closer to him. But it still affects me. I mean, it's hard. I didn't cry that much when he died because I could feel it coming on. But now that I think about it, and how much we meant to each other, and to talk to each other, just to call each other and talk about things, even when there were controversial things that maybe neither one of us even agreed about. It was important to have somebody of that kind of mind near enough to my mind that he can understand my reactions. And anyway, it's been a blessing to be a twin.
Ray, thank you so much for sharing with me and with the viewers of New Thinking Aloud, and I'm sure with many people in the parapsychology community who all hold Rex in high respect. It's a gift to them.
Yes, it is. And I'm so glad that Rex was among us. He has contributed. People need to look again over his work and consider and see how it fits even into their own personal life as far as the PMIR. A lot of people are using PMR without even knowing what they're doing, but it helps to know at times.
And for those of you watching or listening, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
You're so welcome.